Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so excited for this event with Shai DeLuca, and we are so excited that you're joining us, Camera on Campus, for this event. I'm going to introduce our camera fellow, Sophia Rodney, very shortly, but before I do, I just want to remind everyone we are in webinar format. Sophia will give you some more instructions on how you can participate and be interactive during our webinar. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our camera fellow and the co-president of JHP, who is also co-sponsoring this event, Sophia Rodney. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David. Hi, guys. I hope you had a great spring break. Thanks so much for being here. I think tonight is going to be a really awesome meeting. So before I introduce our incredible speaker, here are just a few JHP announcements. The JHP National Zoom Shabbat Happy Hour with Scott Rogowski is this Friday. You've gotten a bunch of emails about that. On March 21st, we will be having a social action bagel brunch. You'll get more information this week from Winston and Alex over email. In terms of Passover, Rabbi Levy is holding multiple seders and having seders to go. You can just check out Chabad's Instagram or just ask Becca for the details for that. On April 9th, we have Shabbat for 2000, so that's really exciting. All good things to look forward to. So now for our incredible speaker, it's Shai DeLuca. He is an interior designer, TV personality, and a prominent speaker on Zionist and Israel-related topics. I've personally had the privilege of hearing him speak before through camera, so I'm so excited that you will all now too. He has an incredible story and background that he will share with you first, and then we will move into a Q&A section. You can type your questions into the Q&A chat feature below, and I will ask them for you. So take it away, Shai. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. First of all, guys, I'm so excited and honored to be here with you guys. I mean, I've missed this. I've missed coming to see you guys at campus. So this is the next best thing, but I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person next year, hopefully. Today's chat is Progressive Zionism. And sometimes I laugh when I hear that as a title because I think to my mind, my goodness, Progressive Zionism, it's just like you're doubling up on the exact same thing. So Zionism, to me, is a progressive movement. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, my background, who I am, and why it is that I'm sitting in front of you guys here today, being somebody who really studied design and architecture. This was never meant to be part of anything that I did as kind of a career or almost an additional lane that my job brought me into. And I will say this, that in the 4 or 5 years that I've been doing this, there has been no greater honor. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. So my story, my name is Shai DeLuca. A lot of people hear that, they hear my first name and then they hear the last name and they're like, doesn't sound like they connect. But that's the interesting story of my family. So my mom's side of the family, we always knew who they were. My mom's side was Jewish, their Jewish background from the beginning of time. We always kind of understood that. My dad's story is a little bit more interesting. In fact, a lot more interesting if you ask me. My dad was born in southern Calabria, which is Italy, almost at the Sicilian border. And he was born to a very poor family in a very small town in basically, a hut. He was born on the ground, my grandmother tells me, in their kitchen. There was no medical assistance or anything like that. It was exactly what you would think a long time ago. Maybe not, the 50s when my dad was born, but, longer than that. People were born in kind of these smaller, less prominent communities. Fast forward, many years, my dad had always had this really kind of yearning to learn about the Jewish people and Judaism, which is something that is weird because all he knew from his family, of course, was that they were Italian, and he was apparently born into a Catholic family. When my dad decided, or when my family decided, my grandparents, that they wanted to leave Italy and make a better life for their family, they did. They left Italy, took my father as well as my aunt and uncle and moved to Canada, where I am now, which is why I now currently reside here. But I am Israeli. So when he did move to Canada, he grew up, from the age of 10 to the age of 18. And then at the age of 18, he had this kind of like feeling like he wanted to go and learn more about Judaism, learn more about Israel, learn more about this kind of culture that he felt like he had some sort of a connection to. He did just that. And it was just for his own kind of knowledge and understanding. But he then met my mom, who my mom grew up in a, like I said, very Jewish family, in a very, strong-willed and family that was really connected to who we are as a people, to the religion. We weren't religious, but Masortim, which are traditional Jews for the most part. My grandmother didn't keep Shabbat, but she would light Shabbat candles. We had Kiddush, we did all these things, but not in a religious way, more in a spiritual way. And when my dad decided that he wanted to propose to my mother, as all of you can imagine, thinking back to 2 generations ago, older families, especially older Jewish families, having somebody who's not Jewish trying to propose to who is their youngest daughter was something that my grandparents were, no. they said, no way, not on our watch, which is kind of a sad thing, but my dad wasn't going to have it. My parents' love story was a love story, and they wanted to be married. And my dad said, you know what, at this point, it really doesn't matter to me. I'm not a very religious person. I will convert to Judaism for you so that we can get married. Perfect. My grandparents accepted that. This was a real testament to my dad's love. And I know he hates when I tell this story, so I'm going to tell it because I know he hates it. When he was 25, that's when he converted to Judaism. As you can imagine, born in Italy, growing up Catholic, the one thing that Jewish boys face at 8 days old, which my dad never did, was a brit milah, circumcision. So at the age of 25, my dad had to do that because he converted to the religion. Now, fast forward many, 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 many years when DNA testing started to become like a thing and a thing that we could count on. We knew so much about my mom's family, but we didn't know much about my dad's family. So we did DNA testing. And I remember my sister and I got our DNA test the first time back at the same time. We did them both together. And we looked at them and we were like, this can't be right. That can't be right. It showed that we were upwards of 90% Jewish. And we thought it was a mistake. We've heard the stories, maybe this is one of the less expensive or the cheaper ones. It's more of a novelty DNA thing. We're going to get some better ones done. So we actually did 6 altogether. All 6 came out the same. And what we then decided to do was do a little bit of backtracking as it came to my dad's family history. And what we learned is my dad's family were actually descendants of Spanish Inquisition Jews who had to leave after the Inquisition or during the Inquisition, made it down to Portugal, then over to Morocco, across to Tunisia, up to Sicily, and ended up in Calabria, which is southern Italy. I tell this story because it's really a story of a testament to a part of progressive Judaism or progressive Zionism that a lot of people don't really know about, and through no fault of their own, but it's through the inability of so many within the Jewish community to really be able to hold on to their history and understand their history, because for so many years, a lot of us hid who we were. A lot of us had to hide who we were so that we wouldn't be persecuted. My dad's last name was changed, obviously, way, way, way back when there were no last names for Jews. Jews didn't have last names as we know them today. Last names became a Jewish thing prominently after the Inquisition. And the reason for that was because in European countries, North African countries, it was very hard to be able to collect taxes from people who, like Jews, didn't have proper last names. Our last names used to be Ben Yosef or Ben Shat. It was the son of whatever it was, daughter, whatever it was. When my family ended up in Calabria, they realized in order to hide their identity and who they would have to take on a local sounding last name, which is where DeLuca came from. We don't know how far back that goes, but we know that's what happened. And that's really interesting because jump forward many years, a lot of people say to me, well, why don't you take your name and change it back to something that sounds a little bit more Jewish or a little bit more, conducive to Judaism? And I say to them, no, because what that does is it then takes away the fact that our history was that we had to hide who we were. And if we forget that we had to hide who we were, it's never going, things will start to happen again. And that really brings us to this idea of progressive Zionism. Zionism is the most successful indigenous right movement of our time. Think about it, guys. Zionism is the most successful indigenous right movement of our time. So we have many different ethnicities, minorities, cultures who still today are fighting for their freedom, for their liberation. The Kurds, Yazidis, there are other people in the world who are struggling as the Jews did. However, we persevered. We came through some of the worst worst racism, in history. Anti-Semitism is the oldest racism in the world. It starts back from Roman times, yeah? From the times of Jesus. That's when anti-Semitism started. So to think about that oldest racism year after year after year growing, the hatred, we saw pogroms, we saw Farhud in Iraq, we saw Beta Israel Jews being attacked in Ethiopia, we saw, of course, the Holocaust in Europe. Jews suffered. Jews suffered. And of course we suffered for many reasons, but one of the reasons that we suffered was because we didn't have the safety of our indigenous home to go back to. Enter Zionism. If I take away Jewish or Israel from everything that Zionism is, an indigenous rights movement, helping a native people, returning a people to their native homeland, all those things today are progressive values. Look at the United States where, some of you might be in Canada. We fight for indigenous rights. We fight for native rights. We fight for minorities. And yet somehow, when it comes to fighting for those same things, for Judaism, for Jews, it's no longer considered to be progressive. So I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think that Zionism, and I'll say it again, is the most successful indigenous rights movements of our time. And I think that, it really speaks to what a people can do if they have the determination to do it. So let me tell you a little bit more about my story, and you can understand why I consider myself to be kind of the poster child for progressive Zionism, because those two things make up who I am. Again, I'm LGBT, I'm Sephardi, I'm a Jew, I'm all these things that make up what the progressive sphere make up, but I am also a very proud Israeli, very proud Jew, very proud of my homeland, and that makes me a Zionist. And those two things in my mind and in everybody's mind should mesh really well. So I grew up a fair number of years here in Toronto, and then, of course, to do my army service, I had to go back to Israel. So at the age of just before 18, I made my way back to Israel, and I decided that I wanted to be in a combat brigade. There was no way that I was going to go home and, just do a desk job. I wanted to give the most that I could possibly give to my country, to this country that really supported me for who I am, a country that saved my family in many respects, a country that was a safe haven, that made sure that we as Jews no longer have to suffer those things that we've suffered in the past, to an extent that no other people can really understand. I don't like comparing oppression to oppression. But I will say, to all of us sitting here, it's very easy to do the research, and it's very easy to understand that the Jewish people over time have been the most persecuted as time goes on. There has never been a time in history that the Jews have not been scapegoated. So of course, returning home, Zionism has to be a progressive ideal. You are returning a persecuted, oppressed people to their home. Enter Shai returns home, and I'm going to the army. Now, I knew at that time I knew when I was like 3 that I was gay. But of course, growing up in a family that was a little bit more, I won't say religious, but traditional certainly, it was something that I was afraid to talk about. I never really wanted to talk about it. And I think that, nowadays I look at my family and I laugh about it because we think, goodness, how ridiculous it was to have feared that when I was so young. Excuse me. But nowadays, it's just a lot more open. When I went back to Israel, this was still, and I went into the army, think about it, that this was still like the late 90s. So it wasn't taboo, but it just wasn't as accepted as it is today in Israel. And of course, I'm talking about my LGBT identity. I like to tell this story because I think that this story really speaks to the progressive mentality of Israelis and those who are fighting for Israel's success, Zionists, in terms of how it plays out in the IDF. February 25th, 1996 was a day that I will always remember for the rest of my life. It is a day that changed my life, and it was a day that really put me on a path, I think, to speak for what it is that I'm doing now, because I think that it really kind of lit a fire under me and made me realize that being Israeli isn't enough, fighting for my country isn't enough. There's a lot more going on in the world that we need to talk about in order to make sure that Zionists and Jews remain and retain their space in progressive spaces. So 1996, February 25th, my parents at that time were living outside of Israel. So I was what was called Chayal Boded, which means a lone soldier. I didn't have my parents. I had my other family there, but when your parents are not in country, you're considered to be a lone soldier. And that gives you certain benefits. You get a little bit more very little, a little bit more of a salary every month. You know, if you have some special services that you might need that other people who have their parents there don't have, you have that opportunity as well. And February 25th, I was staying that weekend. I had a friend who his parents had moved back from Toronto also to Israel. They had moved back to Jerusalem. He was in Jerusalem. His mother called me and said, listen, Shai, I want you to come for Shabbat dinner. I know that your parents are not here. I want to invite you to a Shabbat dinner, and you can leave for the army the Sunday morning. You'll leave from here, which from Jerusalem was actually easier for me to get to, because at that time I was serving in Judea and Samaria. So I had woken up that morning. His mom, like the good Jewish mother that she is, made me lunch, did my laundry. She set me out on my way, but I'm not a Jerusalemite. I'm a Moshavnik. So I am from the south. I know Jerusalem like probably, you know, you guys know Washington, or Canadians know Ottawa. We used to go, but you know, it was like for school trips or whatever. It wasn't something that we used to like. We didn't spend time there. We didn't hang out there. You know, Tel Aviv was kind of like the cool place to be. So I didn't know Jerusalem that well. And she said to me, listen, and again, guys, this is the end of the 90s. We didn't have like our tablets and cell phones and all that stuff. So to get to the proper bus that I needed to get to, I had absolutely no idea where I was going. And she tried to explain to me, go here, try here, do whatever. So all these things, fine. I went down, couldn't find the bus that I needed to get to. And then I asked somebody explained to me where I needed to go. And as I started to run for this bus that I was supposed to catch to take me to the central bus station, the bus, literally, as I got up to it, I hit the back of it, telling the driver to stop, that I wanted to get on. Israel, the driver went and left. And I would say maybe 100 meters ahead of me, that bus exploded. It was one of the terrorist attacks that was happening at that time. And I tell the story, and as many times as I tell it, I'm sitting here, my hairs are standing, because it is something that you cannot, it doesn't matter how many years have passed, it's something you never forget. You never forget the screams, you never forget the smell, you never forget the smell of hair, of skin burning. You cannot take out of your mind the screams of mothers. You cannot take out of your mind the cries. I get a little choked up when I tell this story because I don't talk about it often. I talk about it when I do things like this, and each time it brings up these emotions in me that are still very raw all these years later, because it's still something that we deal with all the time. And I tell this story sometimes to different groups who look at me and I say, how then can you not say that Zionism, returning a Jewish people to their safety, is progressive? This is happening within Israel. People are coming over, crossing into Israel illegally to try to kill me. So Israel, Zionism, the safety net that this gives to Jews, you guys don't want me to have that? How is that a progressive value? I, of course, called my army base that day. They didn't make me go into the army. That was very nice of them. They gave me a week off after that. And the following week, I went back to the army. I was in the army, and getting back to my base, I was sweating. And you know, this is February, March, so you know it's warmer in Israel. It's like the beginning of Shvat already happened, so it's getting a little bit warmer. And I say that because as cool warm as it was, I was sweating buckets, because I decided that was the day that I was going to come out to everybody in my brigade. And I want to preface by saying I was a combat engineer. So a combat engineer is it's a combat position. The testosterone level in combat positions, especially, in Israel, there's certain machoism with Israeli men. Certainly in the past, now it's subsided a little bit, but there was always kind of this macho kind of mentality that a lot of Israelis, especially in the older generations that were facing wars constantly, have. And going back to this, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I said, because these guys are my family. These guys are my brothers. I trust them with my life like they trust me with theirs. And I cannot fathom telling them something that is so, is so much, makes a part of me of who I am. It's a small part, but it's a part of me. It makes up who I am. And be worried that A, I would get kicked out of the army. B, that, these guys would never talk to me. C, maybe they would do something worse. I didn't know. I had religious people in my brigade. I had Orthodox people in my brigade. There were Israeli Arabs in my brigade. There were people that might look at being LGBT as something that would be problematic. Let's just say it like that. And I think I was scared more that day than I was really throughout my training, throughout, anything that I ever did. This really scared me because it was something about myself that I knew that I could never change. Come to the base, walk in, sweating buckets, so scared, throw my bag down. And what happens every Sunday, like every Sunday morning, after the weekend, the guys are all, if you can, I don't know how to explain this other than better to explain it, to imagine a locker room situation. That's kind of the talk that goes on in like the brigade room when you come back on Sunday. I went out this weekend and I like my girlfriend and, I met this girl and I did all these things. And it always used to come back to me. And they're like, so Shai, what did you do this weekend? Well, scared Shai was always, in the past was, I went to my aunt's, I was at my cousin's, I stayed home. They were like, God, Shai's like the most boring person on the face of the earth. When in truth, I wasn't. But I was so scared, to tell them the truth, what I was really doing, that I was hanging out with my friends, that I went to a gay club, that I couldn't see these things, or so I thought. And that day I was like, what's going to happen? So again, same thing, like clockwork, doing the rounds. What do you do? Who'd you meet this weekend? What girl did you go out this weekend? And you hear all the locker room talk, and then it gets to Shai. So Shai, what'd you do this weekend? And Shai got quiet. And they looked at me, and of course, I had spoken with all my friends throughout the week. They had called me, obviously, after the terror attack. Are you okay? So we had spoken throughout the week. But I think for them, this was kind of like a, wow, you could have been on that bus had you like run a little faster, or you knew where you were. You could have been on that bus. And I sat there and I looked at them, and they saw this kind of like almost like a dead face go, like a dead look go over my face. And they said to me, what's wrong? Like, are you okay? Did something happen? Did you get hurt? Were you hurt and didn't tell us? And I said, no. I said, I have to tell you guys something. It's got super quiet because I think more than anything, they were concerned that something had happened to me. And I looked at them and I said, guys, there's a reason that, we always have these conversations, and there's this reason that you guys think that I'm the most boring person in the world. And it's not true, but I've been hiding something for you. And they just looked at me, not knowing what to expect. And I looked at them back and I kind of like did 1, 2, 3. And I said, guys, I'm gay. And it got really quiet all of a sudden. And then my best friend who was sitting next to me looked at me and said, sorry, I should preface by my best friend in the army who looked at me and said, really? Oh my God, why didn't you tell us? I had the perfect person to introduce you to. That was it. That was the whole big story in my mind that I made up, that, Israel is not this progressive society. Israel has like these kind of demons still within them, which at that time maybe some people did. But I tell this story because it really speaks to the progressive values that Israelis in general have. Of course, there are people who in Israel don't have those same ideals, and that's okay. It's an education for a lot of people, and I think that this is something that we still need to kind of push in order to kind of push the progressive mentality within Israel. I talk to people in Israel all the time who say to me, we don't understand what you mean by progressive Zionism, because for them, they read Zionism and they're like, well, why does it have to be progressive? What's different about it? And really, there is no difference. I mean, we can get into technicalities, whether you believe in certain political spheres, whether you believe in what land, belongs to who. None of that really matters when we talk about the general sphere of progressive Zionism. And progressive Zionism, and again, I will say this again, I don't feel the need to put that progressive thing on top of Zionism, because in my mind, as it should be in yours, Zionism is a progressive movement. Fast forward a couple years, I had finished my service with honors. I was injured while I was in the Army, so I did spend some time in a hospital. But after that, I was better, decided that, listen, after all these things that had happened to me in my life, I really feel as though I need to treat myself. I want to do something that I've always wanted to do in my life. I'm a Jew. Like most of you, my parents wanted me to grow up to be a doctor, a lawyer, and an accountant. Accountant was the least of the three. Doctor was number one. That was my mom's big dream. It's a Jewish thing, right? So growing up, I always loved architecture, building, design. That stuff really spoke to me. And I decided after, I did think about going into law. But, after I had done my Army service, after I had been through kind of this, being saved from a terror attack, I said, listen, there's no way that I'm going to now not live my life the way that I need to live it, being true to myself. Had I gone on that bus on the 25th of February, nobody would have ever known who I was. Nobody would have ever known about what makes up Shai and what makes up the progressive values Shai has. And that was sad to me. And I thought, why would I ever live my life now to please somebody else? I have to live my life now to the best of my ability to make sure that I'm doing everything that I can do to make myself happy, but also to make the world a better place. So I decided that in order to be happy, I had to do what I loved, and that was interior design. And after the Army, I worked for a number of years, for a lot of years, to save up money to study in New York. I am type A personality, if you don't know that about me. So everything always has to be the best. Design for me meant either Paris or New York. And I do not speak French. No, not all people who live in Canada speak French. I know some of you think that they do. No, I don't speak French. Excuse me. So I decided New York was going to be it. Now, for those of you in the US who are listening to me, I know you can appreciate this. Canadians might not appreciate this as much, but to go to school in the US, to a private school, because I studied at the Art Institutes in New York, to go to a private school when you're an American citizen from out of state is already here. When you are an international student, it is like here. And that wasn't important to me. None of that mattered because it was what I wanted to do. So saved money, worked years in Israel, got on a plane. I had pocket money. I mean, I had, been able to pay for, I think, some of my books and whatnot. I was approved for a student loan. I think I had a total of 800 American dollars in my pocket. When I landed in New York, said, here I am to study, and off I went. I finished my studies there, and I was offered a great opportunity to then, at that time, bring a company from the US here into Canada to start their design business here. They had heard of me and they wanted me to come up here. And I said, absolutely not. I want to start my studio in Israel first. So I returned back to Israel, opened up my first design studio in Israel, in Tel Aviv, which is in the southern part of Israel. Now it's like the cool, trendy place. When I lived there, it was basically like the bad neighborhood, but it was cheap. So that's where I could live. That's where I opened it up. Move forward many years, this same company came back to me again and said, listen, we know you're in Israel, but we would like to now bring you to Toronto because we still wanted you to head up this company that we have in Toronto. And I thought, well, I've already started my business here. It's up and running. I can go there for a couple of years and kind of do the work that I need to do. And the idea was I was only going to spend maybe a year or two here getting their business up and running and then kind of moving forward. That, of course, didn't end up happening because one of my clients that I did have at that time hired me and said to me, listen, you're really kind of great interacting with people. Would you ever consider doing television? And I thought to myself, yes, of course I want to do television. Like, who doesn't want to be on TV? So perfect. I did a screenshot test and all that stuff. The rest was history. I started working on television here in Canada in 2010 as a design and fashion expert on Canada's longest running television program, which is Cityline. Longest running was 32 years. We were syndicated in the US in 2017. Don't ask me what stations I'm on there because I have absolutely no idea. I will tell you a short story. I was in Alabama one time doing a talk. I was at an airport and this Southern woman ran up to me and she's like, Shai, which was bizarre because I was in Alabama, but apparently there are local stations that get our show. So couldn't tell you which. Moving forward. So I finished, I started working with Cityline in 2013. I started working in 2010. In 2013, I had the opportunity after 3 whole years of every day walking into the studio and saying, I want to take the show to Israel. I want to take the show to Israel. I want to take the show to Israel. Every day getting no, until finally I weared my producer down. Chrissy, I love you. If she's watching or if she ever sees this, she knows that we have this joke. 3 years, I bugged her. Finally, my Israeli chutzpah worked and she agreed. And she said to me, listen, this is a big risk we're taking because there's so much there's so much political kind of rhetoric behind what you want to do. And I said, no. I don't want to talk about anything political. I want to show the progressive society that Zionism has built in Israel. And I remember she looked at me and she said, listen, she said, this is a gamble I'm going to let you take. She said, but it's your gamble. She said, if we get blowback from this is on you. I said, I'm willing to take that gamble. One of those, so we came back, we showed the shows. They were some of the highest rated shows we ever did. And that for me was such a heartwarming thing because it really proved to me that I was able to show this progressive country in the Middle East amongst some of the most non-progressive countries and showing it thrive. And a lot of people didn't know that. And what that did was it led me into being very kind of like using my platform as, you know, being able to share things about Israel because I understood that that was important. That, however, was in 2013. So, of course, as you guys know, 2014 came, the war happened in Gaza. So the Tzukei, which is the protective edge, started to happen in Gaza. And it was the first time that I, as a public figure or somebody who has a public profile, was ever, I guess, felt the need to be able to support Israel publicly. Much like Gal Gadot did in 2014, and she got the backlash for, although, you know, I'm nowhere near that. The backlash that I was getting here was very much the same. And I thought, I am not going to let these people push me back in kind of teaching and exposing the beauty in the progressive kind of nature of what Israel is. And I think that that's, you know, something that a lot of people look at me and they say, goodness, you know, why would you want to jeopardize? I've been very lucky. I must preface by saying, I've been very lucky that I have never felt from my work that, you know, anything that I've ever talked about or spoken about has ever impacted on my job, although I know a lot of people have. So for me, it was very important. In 2014, after the war started and I started to, you know, post things about the war, I remember getting, actually, this was the summer that I believe I was in Boston. I think I was speaking at one of the camera conferences. And I remember getting a message from a producer who no longer works at our show and said to me, how dare you lie about 3 boys being kidnapped? That never happened. And she is one of the most progressive people that I can, or she claims to be one of the most progressive people that, you know, I've ever met. And I said to her, you don't know the facts. So rather than kind of putting, and she started to post things on her social media. I said, rather than posting things on your social media, you know me, we've worked together now for 4 years. I'm the only Israeli in your life that you know. You never even reached out to me and said, hey, Shai, you know, maybe give me some background. Can you give me something? No. To her, the idea that Israel responded was somehow not a progressive ideal. And I remember sitting down and having this conversation with her, and I said to her, well, let me throw it back at you. What do you expect Israel to do when they are being attacked? And of course, she played all the same games that, you know, deter and deflect. And I said, no, let's stay on track. I said, let's not deter, let's not deflect. Let's stay on track. What would a progressive thing be for Israel to do in order to, you know, keep its citizens safe, its residents safe, without you feeling as though it's non-progressive? She never had an answer for me. And I think that that's when I started to understand that the idea of what progressive values in North America or in Europe pretend to be are really not progressive at all. Or they're progressive, but they have a hard stop when it comes to Israel and Jews. And that, in fact, is not progressive. I mean, if you are not able to support the most persecuted people in history, who are you able to support? And how is that progressive? It's in fact not. Of course, then what happened is I had the amazing connection that I made with Camera on Campus. And, you know, I was able to really travel to places. I think Alabama was actually one of the places that, or no, Arkansas, that's where it was. Arkansas was one of the places that I traveled when, you know, people were coming out to me and talking to me. And I met all these amazing communities that I would have never had the opportunity to meet without, you know, working with Camera. And what I like about working with Camera on Campus is we are able to then bring these progressive ideals in a way that makes sense to so many students by just sharing my life story about who I am. You know, I'm not making anything up. I'm telling you who I am. Who I am is a progressive person. All the labels that define me, to most people, except for the label of Zionist, people consider me to be progressive. So I want to fight and take back the word. I was talking about this, you know, just before we started this webinar. It is our responsibility as the Jewish people to take back the word Zionism, to make it mean what it's always been, which was self-determination for the Jewish people in our native homeland or in our indigenous homeland. Nothing more, nothing less. And I think we as a people have done a little bit of a bad job when it comes to kind of, you know, bringing in those reins again. I know I'm saying that I don't remember how you say that phrase. Bringing in the reins again when it comes to where kind of the term Zionism has kind of veered off into. So I think that what I have then showed you guys today really is that Zionism, if we adhere to what it truly is, the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in our native homeland. Nothing more, nothing less. And then look at where Israel is today in terms of all the amazing, sorry guys, I don't know what happened there. All the amazing, all the amazing things that Israel has done over the past 73 years in terms of progressive values. Look at Israel. It is the one country in the Middle East that allows Jews and Arabs to live equally under the law, 100% equal. That is so progressive. And Zionism is the root of that. So guys, I know that, I've spoken a lot, I've thrown a lot at you. The best part of these is always the Q&A because I love interacting with you guys. So I'm going to throw this back now. I know that Q&A has started. Let me throw it back to you and hear what you guys have, what your questions are, excuse me.
Thank you so much, Shai. That was amazing. I could hear your story a million times and never get tired.
Thank you.
So yeah, just a reminder, you can put your questions in the Q&A chat feature and I will read them out loud for you. My first question for you, Shai, is do you mind explaining what the term pinkwashing is and why that is so unfair and hurtful?
Absolutely. So pinkwashing is so as an LGBT person, pinkwashing is the idea that the LGBT community or people who support the LGBT community, allies, are somehow using the progressive values of LGBT peoples in Israel as a smokescreen to hide what's happening with the Palestinians. And when I'm asked that question, and I will tell you the last time I was asked this question that actually really irked me, I was at Nottingham University and I was speaking for camera, and this young woman said to me, you're a liar, you're pinkwashing, and you're using your identity to hide what's happening to Palestinians. I looked at her straight in the eyes and I remember, I can feel the anger. I looked at her straight in her eyes and I said to her, that is the most offensive thing I think I've ever heard. I spent the good part of my teen years and early 20s growing up and kind of really pushing for LGBT rights in Israel. We are at where we are because of people like myself who took the time to say, hold on, we're going to fight within our own society in order to rid ourselves of these taboos and these kind of, backwards ideas about what LGBT is. And we fought and we fought and we fought. Regardless, and that had nothing to do with what was happening with the Palestinians. So I looked at her and I said to her, how can you are telling me, an LGBT person who fought for these rights, for the same LGBT rights that Arabs in Israel enjoy, whether they do not enjoy them in Gaza or the West Bank, how are you telling me that that is somehow a smokescreen? That has nothing to do with what's happening there. We absolutely can talk about that and talk about the successes of LGBT peoples in Israel. Those two things should not clash with one another. You can talk about the challenges that we have, but still talk about the successes that we have. And if you don't talk about the successes that we have, the same way that when I give presentations, I am no way shying away from some of the difficulties that LGBT people still have as, when it comes to civil marriage, or adoptions, or surrogacy in Israel. There are still things that we are working on and we are fighting for. That doesn't mean that we can't still talk about the successes that we've made, So I think that the idea of pinkwashing is literally taking the successes that me and people like me have worked so hard to strive to achieve and saying, let's not talk about that. There are other things that are happening. And that, in my view, is offensive. Let's talk about all the issues, but also the successes.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. And I think it's so frustrating because I feel like Israel is the only country that gets that criticism, talking about their success as a way of hiding their failures. And there's no other country that faces criticism like that, which is why
absolutely
it's so problematic. Another question is, there's a Times of Israel article that talks about how the words "Free Gaza" were printed on a sukkah, and someone wrote in response that people should be targeting supporters of the state, not people practicing their faith. And you were very vocal in speaking out against this. Do you mind talking about that?
You're talking about, sorry, can you remind me which sukkah you were talking about?
About which, sorry, what?
So you were saying there was Free Gaza, someone spray painted on a sukkah?
Yeah.
Yes. So listen, I think that this is exactly where the whole idea of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, when people say anti-Semitism isn't anti-Zionism or anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, this really kind of speaks to that. If you're targeting, Jewish homes or synagogues or whatever it is with something that's politically to do with Israel, well, then you've just now conflated anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. You cannot attack Jews. You shouldn't attack anybody, but you cannot attack Jews for something that is happening for a lot of Jews who live in the diaspora that they really have nothing to do with, and say, listen, what's happening in Israel is somehow your fault. We're going to, ruin, we're going to tag your sukkah, your house, or whatever it is. There has to be a clear understanding, and this is my opinion. If we understand Zionism to be what it is, the progressive value that it is, that Jews have the right to self-determination in our native homeland, to then say that, no, Jews don't, but then say that's not anti-Semitism makes no sense to me. If you say every other group in the world has the right to that self-determination, you are fighting for the right of native people around the world to have that right to self-determination, but then say Jews, you don't have that right, that's literally anti-Semitism. You're literally taking Jews and you're saying, Jews, you're here, the rest of the world is here. It can't be. So if your only recourse is to attack Jews, you're being anti-Semitic. There's no ifs or buts about it. I think that it's really important to understand that as much as people try to say, yeah, maybe in some circumstances anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, the only way that that would be the case would be if you had something to say about a policy that the government did and leave it, and has in no way tie it to A, Israelis, B, Jews. Sometimes we don't have this, we don't have the control over, what a government does. Certainly in the US, you guys have spent 4 years of people saying, what are we gonna do? It was an elected official. You can't do anything about it. It is what it is. And you have to work within the democracy to make it not happen again. That said, it is never okay to say to Jews, you don't have the right to self-determination, whether there's two. So tagging a sukkah or, attacking somebody Jewish simply because they're Jewish and you're upset about something that Israel did, it's not going to fly.
Totally. And I think what's amazing about you is that you are able to defend all of your positions so eloquently and well, no matter how a question's phrased to you. But I think as college students, it's really hard for us sometimes to feel as confident when we're intimidated by our peers or even our professors or different demonstrations on campus, which leads me to a question from an audience member, which is,
sure. Do
you have any advice for how we can spread your messages, maybe even half as eloquently, to our peers?
Oh, listen, I've listened to you guys and I've visited you guys on campuses, and you guys, I will say to you what I said to one of the fellows who came to the camera conference in Boston, however many years ago. It was the first one I think that I went to. Young guy from France, Simon. Some of you might know him. And he stood up and he said to me, I feel as though the best way that I can give back to the Jewish people is for me to join the IDF. Do you agree? And I looked at him and I said, listen, I said, that is a personal choice. I said, but what I will tell you is this, is what you guys are doing on campus today, these clubs, camera on campus, all these allyships that you guys are doing with different progressive groups on campus is just as important as what the IDF does. We just do it in a different way. So you guys are fighting a war. Make no mistake about it. You guys are fighting a war. And it is a war that I don't know that I could definitely do like you guys. You guys are there every day. I come for a day, I speak, and then I leave. I hear your stories and I hear what you guys go through. And it breaks my heart to listen to it. But I will tell you this, you guys are on the right side of history. And sometimes it will just be, and I've been there too, where I will leave something and I'm just like, I can't do it anymore. It's weighing on me too much. Number one, never, ever, ever walk away from somebody if somebody wants to talk to you and they're doing it in a respectful way, absolutely continue talking. I think the only way in which we can get the message out that we need to get to is dialogue. And sometimes that dialogue is going to start from a place that you don't want it to start from, but you can always turn it around to bring it to where you need it to be. There was an interesting story when in one of the universities I was at, and I'll be short because I know we don't have much time, but there was a young woman who listened to my lecture. She came into the lecture at the beginning with a huge Palestinian flag. And I remember that the security said to me, do you want me to remove her? And I said, absolutely not. I said, those are the people that I want in my lecture. I said, more of them, the better. I said, because those are the people that I want to talk to. And she sat through the lecture, and of course she had some, the typical questions that you would think that she would ask. But at the end, she came up to me and she said to me, you know what? I don't agree with everything that you said. I still don't agree with, some of the points that you made. But she put out her hand and she shook my hand and she said to me, thank you though. She said, because some of the things I had no idea about. She didn't know about certain things about Gaza. She didn't know about certain things about the West Bank. And she said that, you know, even though you and I may not agree, she said, I now know when I'm in my next conversation with somebody that when they're, you know, trying to sell me some story, I know I've heard the different side of it. So guys, I would throw this back at you and say this. You will not change everybody's mind. You just can't, you know, and I used to think at the beginning, I'm like, I'm going to get into these lectures. I'm going to change everybody's mind. Everybody's going to be a Zionist at the end of the day. We can't do it. But what we can do is we can plant a seed. That's all you got to do. You just plant a seed for somebody to hear something different. And it might, you know, start them on their own journey of self-discovery. You never know. But do not be deterred from those who are trying to deter you. That should just embolden you to really get out and speaking more. Allyships is my next big thing I'm going to tell you guys to do. And you guys, Camera on Campus, you do a great job of this. Camera on Campus groups can be smaller groups, so definitely join with other groups and do events with them. LGBT groups, you know, people of color, whatever it is. Use these other groups to kind of, you know, when I say use them, don't use them for their voice, but work with them together to show that Zionism can be just as progressive as all these other things, and show them in a way that's organic, that's not preaching.
Thank you so much. That's incredible advice. I personally really appreciate it. And I think I speak for everyone when I say they do too. So another question we have from Jordan Rosenberg is, Israel has gotten a lot of criticism for vaccinating Israelis and not Palestinians, something which many argue is written in the Geneva Conventions. However, the Israeli health minister points to the Oslo Accords as evidence that vaccinating the Palestinian population is not the responsibility of Israel. To what extent do you think the Israeli government is responsible for vaccinating Palestinians?
Right. Okay. So in terms of legalities, the Oslo effects, of course, the Oslo Accord, of course, is where kind of the legal aspect of it lives. Yes. I mean, there are people who will argue with you and say, well, Oslo is broken, so that it no longer exists. The other side of that is, well, it was the Palestinians that broke Oslo, so why is that Israel's fault? I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways to look at this, but I will say this: legally, it is not Israel's responsibility to vaccinate Palestinians. It is the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority. That said, over time, we've seen, you know, that Palestinian workers who have come into Israel have started to be vaccinated. Some other people have started to be vaccinated. I think that it's really important to understand, you know, legalities versus, you know, what would be nice. No other country in the world is expected to give their vaccines to any other population other than their own first. And I've always been of the opinion, get Israelis vaccinated first. If there's, you know, vaccines left over, why not give it to the people who live next door to us? Absolutely. But that should not be a forced thing on Israel. You know, let's talk about, and I think that this is an important fact, $350 million a year are spent on, from the Palestinian Authority, on what we call pay for slay. So paying terrorist stipends or people who are incarcerated in Israeli jails for doing terrorist attacks on Israelis. You know, I was reading an article last week that I think it's something like $9 per vaccine times the number of Palestinians came out to something like $150 million. So think about it. Had over the past 10 years, 350 million times 10, you know, the Palestinian Authority not paid that money to terrorists and saved that money. Think about all the things the Palestinian people could have in addition to vaccines, infrastructure, schools, water supply. I mean, all these things that people are always, and rightfully so, complaining about, they could have had. So no, I don't put it on Israel. I put it on the Palestinian Authority. That said, at the end of the day, if we have leftovers, absolutely. You know, pikuach nefesh lifnei hakol. Try to save a life before anything. It doesn't matter who it is, but vaccinate Israelis first.
So we have another awesome question from our audience. It's, how do you recommend defending your political views while supporting Israel? And this is something I've struggled with. I spoke out publicly about this. I think probably a lot of our club members know that I was recently accused of being a Trump supporter when I wrote a paper for a class that was in support of Israel. So how do you find that balance of not being accused of being in one political group because of your views on Israel?
Right. So, I mean, in the US, it's pretty easy because what is it? I think it's something like 79% of Jews vote Democrat. So and probably 90% or 95% of those 79% are Zionists. So, I mean, that's just like, what's the word? Statistically is just wrong. I mean, it's just a fact. But I think what has happened is over the past 4 years, so much has been politicized and extremely politicized. I think that whether or not you, and I'm not going to get into American politics, but whether or not you support Trump or don't support Trump, what his era did was create this tension within politics, and that the world over. You know, if you were this side, you became really this side. If you were this side, you became really this side. And I think that it became very hard for people to understand just because he was and I will say this the nicest way possible, he made it seem as though, you know, he was a strong Israel supporter in terms of, and that's something we can talk about at another time, but, you know, was it really support for Israel, or was it support for, you know, something that was going to help him? At the end of the day, I think we all know who Donald Trump is, whether you like him or not. And I think just his personality is something that, you know, he does things to make sure that it's for him. Let's leave that with that. What I will say is this, is it's very important to understand that the support for Israel is a bipartisan support in the US. And I think that, you know, you can absolutely follow, you know, Jewish Republicans, and you can absolutely follow the Democratic majority for Israel. These are all the social media accounts that people should follow and understand that there are people on both sides who support the state. So to say to a Jewish person, you know, you are a Trump supporter, or you are, you know, whatever, because of your views on Israel, is one of the most arrogant and one of the most, ignorant comments that I think anybody can do, because what that does is it somehow ties Israel to America. And that is one of the things also that I think that us as a Jewish people, and certainly the students on campus, we need to be able to understand that being Israel's ally does not mean that Israel is dependent on. So, you know, an ally is a friend. An ally is a friend. You know, presidents over the years have had different views and different support, levels for Israel, but the United States has always been an ally of Israel. So absolutely not should nobody ever say to you, a Jew, who, you know, Israel is part of their identity, you are this political party in the US or this political party in the US because of your support for Israel. It's almost, but not the same, it's almost like that dual loyalty thing. It's like, you know, it's putting Jews on saying, you know, everything that you're doing here in the US and your support for certain, you know, candidates here in the US ties to what you want in Israel. And I think that that's a dangerous thing. It really goes back to that dual loyalty. And we all know, according to the IRHR definition, which is being passed, you know, I'm really enjoying seeing it passed one after the other, you know, that dual loyalty trope is anti-Semitic. So if they're good, you know, if they want to be overtly anti-Semitic, well, then here you go, you've done it. But I think that it's important to make sure that you understand that politics in Israel is politics in Israel. Politics in the US is politics in the US. Allyship has nothing to do with one or the other.
I wish I had had you in my class with me so that you could have defended me on that one, because I was left like speechless. I was so caught off guard. Okay, and for one final question, this is more of a fun question that speaks to your interior design. It's from Rebecca Feldman. She wants to know, what is your favorite and least favorite HGTV show, if you have to?
That's funny. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, wow, there's so many, because so many of the people on HGTV I know and I work with, so I hope they're not watching this. So probably the people that I've worked with the most are the Property Brothers, because they've been on our show a million times, so I'm going to have to say the Property Brothers. And my least favorite show, oh my. Okay, no, I shouldn't say that. Property Brothers and Backyard Bills, because Sarah's a good friend of mine, and also the Property Brothers. My least favorite, oh wow. I don't even know. I mean, can I tell you a secret? I don't watch that much HGTV, so don't tell anybody. But I kind of like them all. I think some of the older episodes of the ones I like, they're so dated, so I look at them and I'm like, but I don't have a least favorite. We'll just leave it at that.
And we actually just got one more question in, so do you mind if I ask you?
Sure, absolutely,
a couple minutes? Okay, thank you so much. Rebecca Feldman also wants to know, can you identify a moment that made you decide to be an activist for Israel in addition to your other careers and responsibilities? I think as college students and soon to be some graduates, that managing a career path in addition to being a proud out there advocate for Israel is sort of hard to navigate. So I'd love to know when you decided that you were going to dedicate your life and your career to both.
You know, it's interesting, because I think that there's been a couple points throughout my career that I said it, and then it was really kind of invigorated. Let's just use that word. I think Definitely the first time was, of course, that day that I was saved from that bus bombing. I knew at some point I was going to do something, to support the country. Absolutely in 2014. And then I think the last time for me, which is a big one, it was kind of like a personal thing with me. Those of you who might have followed me or do follow me or might know, a little bit about what it is that I do, know that last year in the summer, I became I'll call it the punching bag for a business here, a local business here in Toronto, that decided to take my image and put it all over social media, calling me a terrorist and I sniper Palestinian children. And because of my public persona, of course, this became a legal matter because obviously it was defamation. And I'm actually in the midst of a lawsuit now with them, being sponsored actually by the Lawfare Project, which is out of the US. And I think for me, it was almost as if up until last summer, it just became kind of when you kind of get up, you go to work, you do your thing, and you come home. And because I had done these lectures and going on and on for so many years, it just became second nature. And when something becomes second nature, it's kind of like habit, right? You do it. Last summer for me, when I became kind of the target of this, and it really became, it was a story that went around the world. I mean, from last summer until this year, I think I've done more international interviews specifically about this lawsuit than anything else I've ever done. And what I realized is it doesn't matter how much I speak or how much I think that I've kind of moved forward with something, there will always be that next challenge. And that really kind of reinvigorated me. Last summer when this attack came out at me, I was like, all right. I was like, gloves off. I was like, I'm ready. I was like, let's go. I'm ready to go. So I think that these personal attacks definitely fuel me, but I think that throughout my history and throughout my life, there have been different milestones. And I don't like using the term milestone because that's more of a positive thing, but milestones or certain things happened in my life that really said, listen, you're not done yet. I'm not done yet.
Thank you so much, Shai. This was seriously incredible. And I'm so glad you all had the opportunity to finally hear from Shai. I'm so excited that it's not just me and you all had this chance because you really are amazing. And we appreciate your time so much.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say again to you guys, please, I say this to each and every student group that I speak to. I know that it can be really, really difficult to face what you guys face on campus. You guys are still in school. You haven't really gone out into the world and you haven't really seen, the bigger challenges out there. And it seems like what you guys are facing is a lot. And I will throw it to you the same as I throw it to every student. You have my email, you have my contact info. Anytime you guys are faced with a question or something that you just do not know how to answer, need a little help with, I'm here. You can message me, you can call me, you can email me. You guys have my contact. Feel free to. I'm always here for that.
Thank you so much. That's so nice. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great night. Shai.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.